Hello there. Today I'm going to show you RTK Query, which is a data fetching library based on Redux that runs everywhere Redux works. It's coming with special hooks for React, but you don't really need to use React to use it. You can also use it, for example, with Svelte. This is being put into early alpha right now, so things are subject to change, but right now we want your feedback on where we are going with this. So I'm going to show you the basics right now. So a core concept of RTK Query is that you have a central API definition. This separates it from many other such solutions. And right now we are going to define that. So we are defining an API that we are creating. And this API takes two required parameters. One is the base query, which will essentially be our client. We are shipping with one for fetch, but you could use whatever you wanted there. So I'm saying base query is fetch base query, and the API we are using right now for this example is regress. So base URL would be https regress.in, I believe. And then we start defining our endpoints. And we are returning these as one big object. So I'm saying my posts endpoint would be build.query. And for the TypeScript users, this is important. For JavaScript users, you can just skip over me doing this. We want to define the result type of this query and the arguments that go into the query. So here we want a list response of user. These are just types I've already created for this API. And we want no input. And now we are defining the basic query that we are sending off here. So it would be no input, as I said, and this would just query /posts. What this does for us is that this gives us an API.usePostsQuery hook that we can use later on, and this takes no arguments, obviously, but let's assume it would, or rather let's just add a second endpoint, namely the post endpoint, namely the user endpoint. I'm sorry. This is users and this is user. And this will be a single response for a user. This will query for users and this will query for user. And we will go for a string argument here, which we name ID. And then we query for user and ID. And now, of course, our hook has been renamed, so this is not usePostQuery anymore. This would be useUsersQuery, but I wanted to show you the useUserQuery. And this would be called with one argument, which is a string. So, assuming we have this call here, this 5 is used as an input here, goes over here, comes in here, and the return value from this actually is the input value to our fetch-based query. So fetch-based query is a client that usually takes everything that it could pass as options to a normal fetch call, but we have all those shorthand value here. Otherwise, you could do something like, well, yeah, a lot of stuff goes in here, but we don't need that right now. So we also don't need this right now, but now let's export some things that we will need later on. For one, let's export the API, but also let's export those hooks extra because it's just useful to use those on their own. So we'll export stuff from the API, and this will be useUserQuery and useUsersQuery. Then we will need to hook this up to our existing Redux store. So we go into the store, we import our API here, and we add the reducer of this API. So the name of that would be the reducer path, which can be changed, but for now it's API by default, and the reducer for that. We also want to add a middleware for this, because the middleware will do stuff like cache invalidation, polling, refetching, and all that stuff that we really want to have in the end. So we are going to concat our API middleware here, and we are done with the Redux setup. Of course, this would be part of your default Redux setup. You have a provider for your whole application. If you don't have a Redux store right now and are not planning to get a Redux store in the near future, you can also use our API provider instead, which means we can just call an API provider with the API that we created, and that will do all that store setup internally on its own, and you don't need to care about Redux if you are not using Redux. But we are using Redux, so we will keep this in. Okay. And yes, it is defined, but it is not used. Let's remove it. And now we go to our users component, and we'll try to render something. So we will use this users query right now. So we have a result from this, and now let's render something. So if result is loading, we will just render the word loading. If result is in error state, we will want to block the error stringified for now. So you can say result.error. And in the success case, so if we are a success, we want to render a list. And within that list, we want to show the data we received. So result.data, and if you look here, this has some things that we get from the API. So result data data.map, and everything in here will be a user, and we want to render lis with user.firstName. Also, this needs a key, or React will complain. user.id. Yes. And now we will let this re-render. And we have an error. And this is true because I used the wrong endpoint. It would not be regress-in/users, but regress-in/API users. Let's go back to our API and fix that. And reload. And we get data from the API, and it is displayed. So this showed you how to render a list from a simple endpoint. We are going to talk about mutations next, and after we talked about mutations, we are going to talk about different types of invalidation of RP endpoints and stuff like that. See you later.